formal EC boss, former EC boss, Sh00t Osei, also ye name say you in the season of recounting losses no ono so e dey abeto just say maybe a tremono e ka kete Ghana for party for be a wambo the particular party edin, but also there was a particular party be a youth no anka omo ya hye ne papa efie ni nyina no se wanye boni bia o declaration ba ko okoye in the line of onunso duty as an EC boss no and then a man encounter as a situation we yentie send onunso e kan no esi FI no pa che say samre no e de hu bebre e ba na komemenye ono nko an mo woni ne busuanfo nyina eduwe bia na omu pia bonten kwampo ana akoye asem esan say na omu nim senia ebeto omo ana de ebeto omo in time to come share screen so na share screen so this is from Graphic Online is saying political party supporters threaten to burn my father's house over EC decisions and no Sh00t Osei and all this answer no ebaye nunti yenkoti senia okan assembly.
Let me tease out our sister Sh00t before we take the next step. The country with the management of the Electoral Commission of Ghana in 2015, at a time when the country was trying to re-emerge in its democratic image, to get a new image out of its democratic process. You managed very successfully, I would say, one of the examples of how elections should be run on this continent. We celebrated you back then, but I must say, I am sure that in those moments, there must have been a time when behind closed doors, you received some phone calls you didn't want to receive. You got some pressures that you didn't want to get. I'm trying to figure out at a personal level, what was the cost of you running an election that high stake? At you personally, what was the cost for you as a female running an election in a big democracy on the continent, with all the challenges that Ghana went through? And by the way, an election that didn't necessarily go in favor of the incumbent, if I recall. What was the cost to you at a personal level? And how does that connect to the journey that the country has taken to now?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to His Excellency President Jonathan. It's a privilege to be here, and it's amazing that you're doing this because, like Baba said, I believe democracy dies. Democracy dies in darkness. Democracy dies when there's silence. So the fact that we have an annual dialogue to talk about democracy is one of the key things that would help to keep democracy alive. And it's also an honor to share a stage with an icon like Baba, who is outstanding on the continent. Yes, I was appointed to the Electoral Commission, first female. So that came with its own challenges. I think there were two major challenges, maybe three. Being female, I was told directly by several people that it was not a job for a female. Even my own father expressed the same fear. It was like, this is not a job for a woman. A lot of people thought I was too young, especially because I was coming after a legendary figure, Dr. Farijan, who had been there for more than 20 years. So the ageism, the sexism created their own problems. But there were also the normal...
How old were you then?
I was appointed in 2015. I was 46. 6. There are the usual troubles that come with chairing an electoral commission. I don't think those ones were unexpected. It's a job that everyone who's held it, I speak to my colleagues, especially across the African continent and the Commonwealth, and everybody has very similar challenges. There's misinformation, there's lies, there's attacks on everything you do. That kind of comes with the territory, so it's almost to be expected. But I think when you're a woman, it can take a different dimension. In terms of personal costs, I wouldn't say the phone calls and the pressure were the issues. Most people know I'm quite stubborn. So the kind of calls you think I received, I probably did not even receive because they knew I would not be amenable. The cost was really on a very personal level, attacks on my family, concerns about the safety of my children and my wider family. There were a lot of lies, and so the whole fabric of the family was affected. It's either they were worrying for themselves or they were constantly worrying about your own safety. My dad was still alive at the time, so that created other challenges. There was a time that a political party mob surrounded my dad's house, that they were going to burn it down because of actions they felt I had taken. So those were the kinds of personal pressures that, as a woman, as a mother, as a daughter, as a wife, as a sister, you have to deal with. So those ones were more worrying than the pressure of people calling you to say, do this. I mean, if they say do it and it's not in line with the law, it's an easy answer. I wouldn't do it because it's not in line with the law. So that didn't really bother me too much. No.
Thank you very much. Is the continent suffering from a crisis of institutions, or as somebody would say, a crisis of strong men?
I don't think it's just the continent. I think it's a global crisis of leadership. We're seeing even democracies that are over 200 years old grappling with very similar issues to what we are also trying to grapple with. In the case of Africa, specifically West Africa, I would think it's a crisis of both. It's a crisis of institutions not having the independence and the structures that they should have to support democracy properly. And so it makes the strong men seem even stronger. We talk about democracy backsliding. And yes, it is. All the statistics, the data shows that democracy is backsliding in Africa. But why is it backsliding? It's the same old issues. It's manipulation of constitutions. It's the clamping down, closing down of the civil space. It's flawed elections, or elections that the people, the voters, do not accept as credible elections. And so we've had several cases where observers would even sign off elections, and then the countries go into crisis because the people do not accept the results, and it becomes a coup. We've had people trying to extend tenure through constitutional manipulation. Together. And then, on the other hand, you have a very young population that has more access to information and opportunities to engage than before. And so the level of frustration is higher. And when you have young people who are facing unemployment and they feel disengaged from society, Baba talked about inclusion. They don't feel included after election day. We should expect very high levels of frustration. And so when you see research that says that, for instance, 51% of Ghanaians think that where there's abuse of elected power, a coup d'etat is the solution, it's actually easy to understand because the last coup in Ghana was 44 years ago. So a lot of the young people who are actually voters now, and probably the majority of voters, have never experienced military dictatorship. So our perspective is very different from theirs. And so when they see abuse of power, they see corruption, they don't see access to power, they don't see any opportunities for inclusion, for having a say in how they are governed, we should not be surprised at the results we're getting. And so ultimately, we need to do better. The leaders need to do better. The institutions, African Union, ECOWAS, they need to do better. We need to strengthen those institutions so they are not seen as an ECOWAS of leaders or an AU of leaders, because that's all we see from the people perspective in conferences with themselves, and we don't see them engaging the people. And so when ECOWAS tells us, for instance, that they have the policy on good governance has zero tolerance for coups, we say yes. But when there's coups, ECOWAS is very loud in condemning coups. But when there's constitutional manipulation or flawed elections, ECOWAS would deploy quiet diplomacy. That's why the people are not happy.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, looks like you touched a nerve. I'm going to come to the